Hey guys, Chef Tom here. Today we're going to talk about the moist cooking methods: steaming, poaching, simmering, boiling. This is a multi-part series where I discuss the different cooking methods. By knowing the different cooking methods, you should have a foundation to know how to cook anything. So let's start off with steaming. Steaming involves boiling water to produce water vapor. In order to get water to a boil, it's going to need to be 212 degrees, and that's the temperature that your steam will start being produced. Steaming happens when you have food in an enclosed environment. The food doesn't come directly in contact with the water, but it comes in contact with the steam, and that's what's cooking it. Steaming is a very efficient way to cook something. It's a penetrating, wet cooking method. It cooks very evenly. It reaches the center of items quicker than a dry cooking method. Steaming doesn't impart any additional flavors to foods, as you might have from like searing or grilling or smoking. It's a very healthy way. It doesn't involve using any fats, at least in the cooking method itself. Now you could add additional fats at the end, but the cooking method does not involve any fats. It also helps keep the nutritional content of the food. By not letting the nutrients leach out, the nutrients stay intact in the food. You won't have very much color loss when you're steaming food, and the flavors will remain true. The foods that you'll want to steam, you can almost steam anything. You can steam very tender cuts of meat, fish and shellfish, vegetables, grains, pastas. Certain desserts are steamed, like panna cotta and flan. Tamales are a form of steaming. They're wrapped in corn husks, and those corn husks help trap in that moisture, and that moisture will circulate within the husk, and that's a steam. And papillote is a form of steaming. That's where you'll wrap, like say, fish inside of a parchment paper with different vegetables and aromatics, and you throw it in the oven, and the steam will circulate within that parchment paper, and it'll cook the fish and the vegetables. Microwaving is also a form of steaming. The excited water particles in the food will become very energetic and heat up. So there's different ways you can steam things. You can have a pot with a wire rack at the bottom and have a little bit of water. You get that water boiling and you'll produce steam. You don't want the food to come directly in contact with that water at the bottom. That's what the rack is for. So you'll have the food sitting on top of the rack, which is above the water line, and the steam will circulate within, and you have a lid on top of the pot that'll create steam, and it'll keep the steam enclosed with that lid. And that's just an easy way to steam at home. A rice cooker applies the same method. It's kind of like having a pot on a burner, but you have that lid, you have the heating element, you have that water in the bottom. It steams around, penetrates that rice. It's a very quick way, efficient way to cook something. I was trying to heat up some brisket the other day, and I wanted to do it quickly. I actually did it in a rice cooker. That steam really kind of penetrates, and it's that moist cooking method. So if you have something that's dry, if you throw it in the steamer, it might help add some moisture to it. An Instant Pot is a form of steaming. It's a pressurized steaming. Pressurized steaming is a very quick way to cook something. It's like one step above a rice cooker. You have that enclosed environment with the steam going around, but with Instant Pot, it doesn't let the steam escape, so it builds up pressure, and that pressure along with the steam is putting a lot of force on the food, penetrating that food very quickly. You can get a very quick cook, helps break down fats and collagens pretty quickly. And then you have commercial steamers. They're metal boxes. You open the door, you have certain like levels, you can put stuff in there. It's a like tiered environment. One thing to be careful with when you're working with a steamer is steam burns are one of the worst burns you can get. I'd say it's even worse than being burnt with like fryer oil, just because that steam penetrates so easily. So if you're dealing with steam, you want to wear oven mitts. If you're taking the lid off, pull it off quickly, or if you're opening a commercial steamer, you want to open the door quickly and back away. If you're steaming in a pot, you want to bring your water to a boil. You'll have your wire rack. You'll place your item on the wire rack in a single layer to allow the steam to envelop it. Steaming can cook very quickly, so you'll want to check it quicker than you would anything else. You'll want to cook it till it's done, or al dente. Al dente means firm to the bite. Most things that I've steamed have been served immediately, but if you're not serving it immediately, you probably want to hit it in an ice bath. That's called shocking. If you put something in an ice bath, it'll immediately halt any cooking. If you didn't do that, you would have carryover cooking. As the food sits there and it's still hot, it'll cook a little bit more. And sometimes you want to stop that cooking like immediately, so you use something like an ice bath, and that's called shocking. I'll usually season my items after I steam it, just so that any moisture won't wash that seasoning off. But you can always season it beforehand too if you want. The amount of liquid that you're going to need depends on how long you're going to be steaming it for. I mean, you only really need enough liquid to produce steam. steam. So as soon as you run out of liquid, the steam will stop, and either you'll be scorching the bottom of your pot or your commercial steamer. When you're done steaming, you can toss the items in like butters or oils or different aromatics and season it. So next we're going to talk about poaching. Poaching is illegal in most states. Poaching is a combination of steam and simmering. It's a very low simmer. The liquid is going to be around 140 to 180 degrees. With poaching, you're going to be partially submerging your item in the liquid. You can cover your vessel with either a lid or parchment paper to help keep that steam in there. So you have like a slow simmer and a steaming method kind of happening all in one. When you're poaching, you're going to want to have a flavorful broth with a little bit of acid in there and aromatics like garlic, shallot, spices. I usually throw a couple lemons in there, and covering the pan will help capture some of that steam. You'll be cooking the item from both sides. So the items you're going to want to use in your poaching are tender cuts of meat, typically fish. I've also poached fruit. You can poach vegetables, you can poach eggs. The liquid that you're poaching in is oftentimes used as a sauce afterwards. So any like vegetables or aromatics in there, you'll kind of want to like pre-cook a little bit before you add your main item, like say fish. And that'll just allow all the items to be finished at the same time. Pre-cooking your vegetables or your aromatics will help disperse that flavor into the liquid also. The amount of liquid that you're going to use in your poaching depends on how much stuff you are actually poaching. You want to have it submerged almost all the way. And then if you're going to make a sauce afterwards, you don't have too much liquid, because then all the flavors will be diluted. Like say like you're poaching fish, you'll poach your fish in the liquid till it's done, take the fish out. You might reduce that liquid a little bit more and thicken it, maybe finish off with a little butter. You want to use a very shallow pan that has straight edges, like a hotel pan or a rondeau, or even like a baking dish, just so that that liquid will stay in there and you're not worried about spilling it out. You'll bring that liquid to a low simmer. You can either do that on a stovetop or you can do that in your oven. It's going to be between 140 and 180 degrees. You're going to see a couple bubbles per second. Those bubbles are going to be little bubbles. That's when you'll add your main item that you're cooking. And then from there, you'll want to cover it with a lid or parchment paper just to help keep that steam in there, help the cooking. And then once the food's done, you'll remove it from the liquid. And then if you choose to use that liquid as a sauce, you can prepare that sauce. Next, we're going to talk about simmering. So when you're simmering something, you're going to want it fully submerged in the liquid. It's going to be between 180 and 205 degrees Fahrenheit. You'll have tiny bubbles, not big rolling bubbles, because that's a boil. Oftentimes in recipe books, you'll see a terminology, bring to a boil, return to a simmer. Sometimes that can be abbreviated as BTAB, RTAS. You're just bringing it to a boil to get it there quickly, and then you're dropping it down a notch just so it's not a rolling boil anymore, but it's a slow simmer. You see a couple tiny bubbles per second. You can use a flavorful broth, aromatics. When you're simmering, you'll typically use it for tougher cuts of meat because you want to kind of break down that connective tissue, and simmering works very well for that. You can also use it for cuts of meat that aren't as tough, like chicken or pork, shellfish. Also, it's the preferred method for cooking rice or grains or even legumes. So if you're cooking soups or sauces or anything that has a thick liquid in it with heavy chunks of food, then you definitely want to have it at a simmer just so that you're not scorching the food. Once it happens, that's something you can't remove. You'll want to stir often. You want to check back on it. You want to make sure that you see a couple bubbles every second, like 5 to 10 bubbles every second. Oftentimes new cooks will put something in a pot and throw it on the flame on full blast and then walk away, and then the stuff gets scorched at the bottom. So things that are not supposed to be boiled, like thicker items, you want to have at a simmer. So you'll bring the liquid to a boil and then you'll return it to a simmer, just because that'll be quicker. And then you'll add the item, you'll submerge it, or you can bring it up to a simmer with the item already in there. You can cover it or you can not cover it, personal preference when it comes to that. You can cook it on your stovetop or you can cook it in the oven. Crock pots will simmer. You can cook it over direct heat or you can cook it in the oven if you want. There's a lot of ways. It's basically you just need those bubbles coming up every couple of seconds and that 180 to 205 degrees. You'll basically simmer the item until it's it's done. So next we're gonna talk about boiling. Boiling happens when water reaches 212 degrees. You'll see a lot of rapid movement of water in there, lots of bubbles. In order to get water to boil more quickly, you'll wanna put a lid on the pot. Oftentimes I'll salt the water beforehand. Generally speaking, when I'll boil something, it will be in water. Now like with like soups or something that has a flavorful liquid in there, I usually won't boil it because I don't want the bottom to scorch. So when you are boiling something, you want it to be a thinner liquid. If you're trying to have the liquid be part of the end product, then boiling it might scorch any items that are in there. They'll get burnt at the bottom of the pot and that'll impart a very nasty flavor to your food. But boiling is necessary for when you're cooking vegetables in water or even pasta in water, because you need that really rapid movement to happen to cook those things properly. Now you can use flavorful liquids, but again, it's going to be a very thin liquid like chicken stock or beef stock. You don't want something too thick. So boiling items is good for vegetables or eggs or pastas. You can boil items until they're very soft and then you can puree them also. So when you're boiling, you want to see a lot of rapid large bubbles, and you want those rapid large bubbles to be there the entire time. You don't want it to stop boiling. A good way to help with that is to put a lid on it. Put a lid on there while it's cooking also, and that'll help keep the heat trapped in there. You won't have as much loss of heat when you're cooking. You don't want to overcrowd the water with too many items. You want to kind of do it in batches if you're cooking a lot of food. When you add the item to the water, it's going to drop the temperature of the water. And you're going to want to use plenty of liquid so that you're not overcrowding. The more liquid you have in there, the more of a buffer you kind of have between temperature dropping and just the space in general for the food to cook in. I went over shocking earlier, but you might have heard the term blanch and shock. Blanching is when you boil an item and then you shock it in the ice water. You'll usually shock something mostly when you're boiling it. Okay, so you'll have your water fully boiling. You can add salt to it. Once that happens, you can add your items. If you're cooking, let's say broccoli, for example, you'll cook that broccoli until you'll notice the color will go from the raw broccoli color to a very bright, vibrant green color. At that point, you're very close. I would take a piece out, kind of test it for doneness, maybe even taste it a little bit, check it for tenderness. I'd kind of bend it a little bit, see how tender it is. You want to take it out of the water while it's still very vibrant and green, and then shock it in ice so that it halts the cooking right away. You're gonna want to have the ice bath ready before you put the food in the water, just so that you're not scrambling around trying to get ice and water and then your food will overcook. But you'll notice that broccoli will become bright green. You'll take that broccoli out of the water and you'll put it in the ice bath, stir it around in the ice bath until it's cold, and that will stop the cooking immediately. Now, if you don't stop that cooking immediately, or if you blanch it too long, then the broccoli is going to turn brown and it's going to become mushy. Now, if you want to puree an item, then you can let it go a little bit longer, just so that it'll break down easier inside your food processor or your blender. Generally speaking, you want to take the food out before it turns brown and mushy. You can either serve it immediately, or you can shock it in your ice bath, and then when you go to serve it, you can toss it in butter and seasonings, aromatics, whatever. Well, that's it. I hope you got a lot of information out of this video. If you did, please give it a like and subscribe.